Hello there, I'm Erin Ade. This is Boom Bust, and these are some of the stories that we're tracking for you today. We have one fantastic show for you today. First up, we have Melissa Bell live and in studio. Now, Miss Bell is the co-founder and executive editor at Vox.com, and she's sitting down with me to discuss new media and the disintermediation of old media's business model. It's pretty exciting stuff. Then Ron Paul is on the show. I sat down with the former congressman earlier to discuss economics and foreign policy, including everything from Scottish independence to ISIS to his son's presidential bid. And in today's Big Deal, Edward Harris and I are discussing a slowing Chinese economy. You don't want to miss a moment, and it all starts right now. Welcome to the show. Now, this is a very big week for Scotland, as a vote for Scottish independence is slated to be held on Thursday, September 18th. However, a complex and potentially more explosive situation is unfolding right now in Spain. Last week, as many as 1.8 million people in Barcelona marched in support of Catalonia's latest bid for independence. On November 9th, the region of Catalonia, which includes Barcelona, is scheduled to vote on whether it is to leave Spain. Catalonia is systemically important to Spain's economy, as the region accounts for 19% of Spanish GDP, 26% of exports, and more than 50% of land exits to Europe. That's a lot. Now, according to local polls, roughly 55% of the more than 7.5 million people in that region want independence from Spain. However, as far as the Spanish government is concerned, the November 9th vote is in and of itself illegal. Madrid has been far less accommodating of Catalonia's aspirations for independence than the British government has been to the Scots. But with the momentum now behind the yes camp in Scotland, Catalan leaders see hope for their referendum this upcoming November. Spanish Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy has warned that an independent vote of Catalonia would be isolating and also make it vulnerable outside of the European Union, and it would also have to create its own currency. But the president of Catalonia, Artur Mas, says, quote, once independence is a reality, everybody in the economy accommodates to the situation. Now, that may be wishful thinking from Mr. Mas, but with that said, Catalonia does represent 1/5 of Spain's entire economy, and with a 6-year economic slump, along with corruption scandals rocking the governing party and royal family, a portion of the population supporting independence has tripled to about 45% since 2007. Now, this past Friday, Spanish bond yields recorded their biggest weekly rise in more than a year as expectations of a U.S. interest rate hike exacerbated the weakness. Now, while the Catalonians' November 9th vote might not mean anything to Madrid, it means something to those showing up for the vote. It definitely does. And if the Scottish referendum proves successful, the global economy most certainly will look to Spain as the next shoe to drop. Whatever happens, we'll be watching. Joining me now in studio is Melissa Bell, executive editor at Vox.com. First and foremost, welcome to the show. I'm thrilled to have you here. I'm a big fan of Vox, but let's dive right in. First question. Now, I've heard you say that media puts forward the newest information and not necessarily the most important information. So what did you mean by that?
I think that what we see a lot of times, especially online, is that we're caught in sort of the stream of the latest information. You see it presented in reverse chronological order on blogs. You see it presented in Twitter, where we're constantly updating each other about the latest tidbit on some news scoop. And what happens sometimes is when we're in this flood of information, we sometimes are getting the newest, but we're not getting the most important. We oftentimes leave behind the background or the context to stories, and there's something that can be said for this characteristic that's missing from a lot of news stories, and I think that the web also provides an answer to how to provide it. The web doesn't have necessarily any lack of space. It also offers the characteristic of persistence. You can put something up online online, and it will be there for as long as the servers are running. So we're hoping to answer that lack of background with Vox.
Now, I kind of get the sense that media, and I'm sure you get this as well, they kind of refrain, media, they refrain from presenting, the most important news if it's not sexy enough, if the folks won't want it. But is that a cop-out? Is that okay to do?
No, I don't think it's necessarily it's not necessarily a factor of the sexiness appeal. I think that it's really a factor of the space, a question of space. Okay. When you're on a news show, you only have 30 minutes to present the news. If you're publishing something in print, you only have a certain amount of space to tell the story. So really what you need to deliver is the latest information to your viewers or to your readers. You're presenting the information based on the constructs of your vehicle.
Right.
Online, we don't need to be constricted by space.
Yeah, which is extremely helpful. But it's not just about how interesting the news is either. You kind of have to make it digestible for a broad audience. And I want to say, not dumbing it down, but you have to really understand these concepts that you're reporting on. It's imperative. So how do you do that at Vox every day and put out such strong product?
Thank you. I love to think about the fact that there's all different levels of understanding of news stories. You can have a cursory understanding of a story. You can have an in-depth expertise on a story. Everybody has different levels of information about subjects that they're interested in. I, for instance, may not know a ton about Ukraine right now, but I might have a depth of understanding about some policy in the U.S. Right. But it doesn't matter. I still want to know this. I want to know different levels of information. So we try to present stories according to where a reader is at when they're entering that story. They might need just the basic information to get acquainted with the story, and they might need a much longer, in-depth explanation because they're much more acquainted and they want more information about a story.
That makes sense. Now, how much of so-called new media, is going to be about this integrated model where you can use print, you can use video, mobile, phablet, tablet, whatever you're going to use? How much of it is about this and getting into that space?
I think that really what we're looking at right now, and we're seeing this at Vox, but we're seeing it across the journalism industry. We're just seeing such a exciting time of invention, and it's terrifying and exciting and wonderful and creative all at the same time. We just were introduced to the new Apple Watch. Do we have to create news delivered to the watch? Perhaps.
Probably eventually.
Yeah. And I think that's what makes this time so fascinating to be a journalist and also to be a reader, because you're getting news delivered to you in all sorts of formats, and how we figure out how to deliver that context to you is really going to be interesting to watch over the next few years.
It absolutely will. But I want to bring this up because back in 2011, News Corp started a tablet-native digital news network called The Daily. I actually worked there, and it was a platform that enabled the news to be delivered via print, via pictures with some captions, via video, whatever was the best way to tell the story, they would tell it in that format. However, it folded only 1 year after it got off the ground, and we have a quote here. It's from News Corp CEO Rupert Murdoch, who said that The Daily could not find a large enough audience quickly enough to convince us the business model was sustainable in the long term. So how do you produce a sustainable business model with this type of platform or one similar to it?
I think The Daily is a really interesting example of how what we're doing with digital journalism is we're trying to find some answers right now. It's a really young industry. It's only about 25 years old. And I think The Daily was an example where you had something a little bit ahead of its time. I think that we all love to look for the silver bullets in journalism. How is this going to solve the business model? How is this going to really bring a resurgence to the media industry? And you can't say that just because it didn't work once, it won't work again. There was probably a lot of lessons learned during the Daily's experiment. And I think that what we need to do is just constantly keep trying, keep experimenting with different types. David Plotz, Slate's editor-at-large, recently was tweeting about how when they began Slate in 1996, there was 5 business models. Today, he counted 76. Wow. Who knows what will happen in the next 10 years? There's just such a growth potential online at the moment, and that's why we got to just keep trying different things.
Now, how is the internet, I mean, it's probably not a short answer, but how has the internet disintermediated the old newspaper business model?
I think that, one example that I always like to use is actually, I'm stealing from Rob King from ESPN. He loved to tell the story about how when he was working in a newsroom, there was a bunch of reporters reporting on this new company called Craigslist. And nobody was thinking that they should stand up and wave their hands over to the advertising side and say, hey guys, I think we might have a problem here. And you see that there was this real, because of the fact that the advertising and the editorial sides were really separated, nobody said, hey, there's a problem. Our classified business is really in trouble here. And to me, that's a sign that we really need to be thinking holistically about the business that we're in, that we need to be considering the business model as well as editorial model. And that's just one example of the changes that the internet has brought.
Among many, I'm sure. Now, BuzzFeed, they've obviously made quite a splash in terms of a new way to deliver an old message or quizzes, but they recently announced that they're getting into business news. So what do you make of that business model as a vehicle for internet consumption going forward? Specifically, I mean, the BuzzFeed business model for business.
I'm not really familiar with the BuzzFeed business model. I wouldn't be able to really to go in depth on that. But I think that they're one company that I think is fascinating right now. They have a lot of great ideas about how to keep people interested in their content.
Right.
And I think if they can bring that same vibrancy to business writing, I think it's going to be a really interesting thing to watch.
It will be. And what's interesting is that even on this show, we're a business show, and it's hard to kind of get a stronghold in this tried and true Wall Street Journal, CNBC kind of world. So we'll see how that works out. But I want to ask you finally, what do you think of this internet-centric news and what it will look like 5 years from now?
We'll all be reading it on our watches.
That's it. End of interview. Maybe.
I don't know. I mean, I think that I think that it's going to still be at the very root of it, great storytelling, and the power of a story well told never changes. How it's delivered is definitely going to change, and that'll be really interesting to see how we figure that part out.
Absolutely, Melissa. Thank you so much for being here. It's been a true pleasure speaking with you, and keep up the good work over at Vox. Thank you. That was Melissa Bell, executive editor at Vox. Time now for a very quick break, but stick around because when we return, Ron Paul will be on the show. The former congressman sat down with me earlier today to discuss foreign policy and economics, and you definitely don't want to miss what he has to say. Then in today's Big Deal, Edward Harris and I are discussing a slowing Chinese economy and what that means for the rest of the world. And remember, you can see all segments featured on today's show on YouTube at youtube.com/boombustrt and on Hulu at hulu.com/boom-bust. Now we have to go to break, but before we do, here are a look at some of your closing numbers at the bell. Come on back.
What are your thoughts on what's been going on in Washington?
Well, it's a mess, Larry. I mean, the whole country is being scoffed at and laughed at.
Enough is enough.
The media, the candidates, the corporatocracy, covering issues that actually affect you and me doesn't do too much for ad revenue.
Biotech agriculture giant takes on a 76-year-old American farmer based in Indiana.
How much fallout do you think this is going to create for the CIA?
Do you think this is what's triggering the crisis?
America's the largest economy in the world. It's also the largest debtor nation in the history of the world.
Breaking the Set is mostly about alternatives to the status quo, but one that gave real alternatives a voice.
One minute they were working toward the American dream, the next they were just trying to survive the night. It's time for Americans and lawmakers in Washington to wake up and start talking about the real causes of poverty in America.
I'm the resident, and I know words are powerful. Words like cheap, as in people who buy the crap our media sells us are acting like a bunch of sheep. Or words like greedy, as in our entire financial system is rigged by a bunch of greedy jerks. Or words like consumers, as in there's more to life than just being gluttonous consumers. I'm the resident, and I'm fighting idiocy one carefully chosen word at a time.
I would rather ask questions to people in positions of power instead of speaking on their behalf. And that's why you can find my show, Larry King Now, right here on RT. Question more.
Welcome back to the show. Now, to cover a number of topics ranging from the Fed to the threat of ISIS, I was joined earlier by former U.S. Congressman Dr. Ron Paul. And I first asked him if his son, U.S. Senator Rand Paul, is running for president. Here's what he had to say.
I don't know.
No, you don't want to break news today? You can do it right here on Boom Bust if you feel like it. It's totally your call.
You have to ask him.
Oh, okay. Well, in that vein, you know, if you had to advise your son on what to expect in a presidential campaign, theoretically, what would be among the most important, the very most important items on your list in terms of advice?
Well, I think I'm past that stage. You know, I had a few years way back where I could influence my children. And after that, I've taught them to be very independent-minded, so I'm not in the business of telling any of my kids what they should believe or do and give them advice.
Well, we do know that parents are very powerful in influencing their children. At least my father was in my life, so maybe we can expect some of that. Now, let's move on. Dr. Paul, let's talk now the economics of foreign policy for a bit here. Last time we spoke, you said the U.S. should not be involved in trying to determine what's best for other people. So do you think the money the U.S. spends doing exactly that now would be better used to shore up finances here at home?
Well, yes, I think all money spent overseas is harmful because it's usually a negative result from spending it, not only because it costs us something and it takes it out of the productive economy and impoverishes our people. War and wartime expenditures help a small number of people, but not the people per se because it's so wasteful. You take, for instance, the military-industrial complex likes to build weapons, and then some people say, hey, we have to send them over to Syria so we can overthrow Assad. And then those weapons end up in Iraq. And then we say, oh, they're in trouble now. We better help out the Iraqis again. We got to go after these radicals. So what is the first thing we do? We go over there and blow up the weapons. No, that doesn't make any sense. That's all a drain on us, and it comes back to haunt us. That's why we're not welcomed around the world so much, especially in the Middle East, and that's why there's a growing number of people who have been radicalized who would like to kill Americans because we're so involved. But economically, it's always a cost. War is very, very costly. It's usually financed by inflation, that is printing money, which we're doing, and then the devaluation of the currency, which impoverishes the poor people. So there's a moral argument, there's an argument for peace, and there's an economic argument why we shouldn't be there, and it makes no sense whatsoever. The founders of this country said, stay out of it. Stay out of the entangling alliances and be friends with nations, trade with nations, but don't get involved in picking sides in civil wars especially.
Should the president take on ISIS in Iraq? I mean, does ISIS represent a clear and present danger to America?
No, absolutely not. That's a foolish thing. It was foolish when we got involved in 1990, 91. It was foolish in 2003 when we expanded and invaded it, and the bombing in between, killing hundreds of thousands of Iraqi. It's time to quit and time to say that it's not working. I mean, the weapons that we've sent over there and so-called we're going to help the Free Syrian Army, you know, like McCain wants to do. It's the Free Syrian Army that ended up, turning over their weapons or losing their weapons to ISIS. At the same time, those moderates over there have been helpful to ISIS, and actually it's pretty well recorded now that for $50,000 they turned over one of those journalists to ISIS. I would say it's a bad deal. It's bad for our national sovereignty. It doesn't make us safer. It makes things more dangerous. It's very costly. It sets the stage for an undermining of our civil liberties at home. So I can't think of one good reason to have been over there creating chaos and then switching our authority to the point where, you know, the Bush doctrine is, you know what, if there's a threat out there, we have to, you know, make a declaration of war even though they haven't done anything. You know, it's this whole idea that we have a right to start a war because of a potential danger that might come later on. I say come home, and you would get rid of most of those dangers.
Dr. Paul, leaders of more than 30 countries are in Paris meeting to discuss a global response to counter ISIS. Now, 2 countries missing from the talks, that's Syria and Iran. So do you think Western governments will have to work with Syria and Iran if they want to defeat the terrorist group?
Well, it's actually crazy, you know, what we're doing. We're over there. We're going to fight ISIS, and ISIS is detested by Syria and Iran. So we don't want to even talk to them. They hate each other. If we walked out of there, maybe ISIS would be disappeared rather quickly. I mean, they're talking about 10 or 20,000, and they have millions of people of Muslims, but they won't dare get involved because I don't think they're going to get the troops. I don't think they're going to get the support. It's going to be all fall on us because they're going to say, well, yeah, we armed the Iraqi army, but the first attack by the radicals, they dropped all their weapons and ran. So they're going to defend this? So I would think that if you don't like ISIS, just walk away and Syria and Iran will take care of them and they'll get rid of all the radicals. Just as Saddam Hussein did. There was no al-Qaeda in Iraq and there's no al-Qaeda in Iran. So we shouldn't be so hypocritical that if we detest the radicals that do want to do harm, then just back away and somebody will take care of them. If they won't take care of them, us getting over there isn't going to help. We'd end up with another 10 or 15 years of saying, well, we have to contain and defeat the radicals, and it's just so foolhardy. I cannot believe that we persist on the same policy, which is now, as far as I'm concerned, 24 years old. Pretty soon we're going to have a 30-year war against the Middle East with no benefits coming of it.
Dr. Paul, Scotland will decide this week on whether to break away from the UK and become an independent nation. And recent polls have shown that the Yes campaign, which is in favor of breaking away, it's gaining substantial ground, and it's leaving the pro and anti-independence camps in a virtual tie here. So with the UK as one of our closest allies to the U.S., what are the key issues here?
Well, one is self-determination, and everybody says, oh, we're for self-determination. We went into World War I, and that was Woodrow Wilson's idea, right of self-determination. Okay, so morally we're on the right side of that. And I think it's a great thing. We should have self-determination. I happen to believe in smaller units of government. The larger the unit of government, the worse things are. The more likely is that you're going to have authoritarianism and special interest government. So I think people should have the right to leave a larger unit of government. I think this is a great move, and Scotland, I hope they are able to pull it off.
That was former U.S. Congressman Dr. Ron Paul. Time now for today's big deal. Big deal time with one of my favorite guys, Mr. Edward Harrison. And today we are talking about China. China. Now, over the weekend, poor economic data was released that demonstrated a slowdown in industrial production, retail sales, and fixed asset investments in China. So, first of all, can you give us an idea of how we got to this place and the Chinese economy got to this place in the first place?
Well, yeah, basically what happened is that China was booming, growing very fast. Then we hit a speed bump in the global economy in 2008 when the United States, much of Europe had a real big problem. And China, they also are very dependent upon exports to the United States and Europe. And as a result of that, they needed to turn on the turbo boosters. They increased government stimulus a lot during that period. And so in the aftermath of the great financial crisis, China was growing very prodigiously. The only problem is not only leading up to the crisis, but during that time, they were creating all sorts of excess capital investment, excess spending, infrastructure, all these cities to nowhere where no one lived.
The ghost cities, which are incredible.
At some point, the whole thing had to slow down, and that's what we're seeing right now, is that the Chinese authorities have finally said, look, this is getting out of control. All of this investment is malinvested, and it's a poor allocation of resources. We need to slow it down and write off some of these debts that are associated with it.
Now, that's how the Chinese government is obviously responding to it, but what are their options? What options are on the table in terms of taking care of this?
Well, yeah, I think that there are two options. As Michael Pettis actually wrote a recent article that I carried at Credit Write Down that's very good about this. It's talking about what does a good Chinese adjustment look like. And his take basically is that a bad adjustment is one where they just keep on going, try to keep the 10% growth rate up, or at this point it's now 7.5%. And keep that going using all of the tools that they've used before in terms of stimulus, excessive credit growth, all of this infrastructure building that creates overcapacity. And doing that may keep the growth up for the short term, but it's just going to build up a lot of bad debt that ends up crashing at the bottom. A good way to deal with it is actually to accept the fact that you need to slow the rate of growth down, perhaps to as low, Michael Pettis says, to 3% over the next few years.
Like it's
But, people have targets to hit and so forth, and that is, from a lot of people's perspective, it's going to change. It's going to create winners and losers. And the people who are the winners today are not necessarily going to be the winners in that paradigm. And so that's going to create a lot of political upheaval.
But sometimes it's taking your medicine. It's what needs to be done to get you back to the place where you have to be. I'm a fan of that. But, what does this data mean kind of for the rest of the world and the U.S. as well, economically?
Well, given the fact that we have a huge private debt overhang, which we see especially in Europe right now, and even though the United States is growing a little bit better, there is still that overhang. It means yet another place where there's going to be a slowdown. So you already have a slowdown in the United States, you have a slowdown in Western Europe. We have Brazil, Russia, and China, all three of the biggest emerging markets slowing down at the same time. That means that no one's really there to pick up the slack in the global economy. So overall, to the degree that you have some sort of shock to the economy, oil shock, whatever it may be, then there's not going to be another agent that's there to say, look, we're going to actually be able to make up for the lost revenue, the lost income from that shock.
We only have 20 seconds, but I want your take. Optimistic on China, yay or nay? What do you think?
I'm optimistic over the long term that they can pull it off and that they are actually trying to decelerate it. And they have the wherewithal to be able to politically make that happen.
There you have it. All right, Ed, thank you as always. That's all for now, but please follow us on Facebook. Check out our Facebook page, facebook.com/BoomBustRT, and please check us out on Twitter @AaronAid, @EdwardNH. From all of us here at Boom Bust, we thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.